Take a good look at this tool. It's heavy, maybe 3 pounds of forged iron. At one end there's a wooden handle, smooth from years of grip. At the other end, two long curved claws that spring open and closed, lined with deep teeth like the jaws of some mechanical beast. Hold it in your hands and you'd feel the weight, the balance, the purpose built into every inch. Most people today have no idea what this was for. In fact, if you walked into 100 American homes right now, you'd be lucky to find even one person who could name it. But 150 years ago, nearly every household in the northern states owned one. Every single winter, families depended on it. This tool was as common as a can opener is today and just as essential. But now, it's gone, vanished from memory. And it's just one of dozens of clever, beautifully made tools that built this country and then disappeared without a trace. Those iron claws with teeth are ice tongs, and they were how America kept food cold before refrigeration. Picture a January morning in 1880. Your grandfather walks down to the frozen pond at dawn, fog still hanging over the ice. He's got a saw and he cuts blocks of ice 2 feet square, each one weighing close to 100 pounds. Then he grips those blocks with the ice tongs, the teeth biting deep so the weight locks them tighter, and he hauls those blocks up to the ice house. Packed in sawdust, that ice would last through the summer. Every home had ice tongs hanging by the door. The iceman delivered to your house 3 times a week, and he carried those blocks with tongs just like these. Then electric refrigerators arrived in the 1920s, and within a single generation, ice tongs went from essential to obsolete. Now they hang in antique shops, and people guess they're for logging or moving hay bales or holding fireplace wood. The real purpose, the genius of those spring-loaded jaws, is lost. Next to the ice tongs in that same farmhouse kitchen, you'd find something even stranger. It's a cast iron cone, about 8 inches tall with a spiral screw down the center and a wooden plunger. At the top there's a funnel, and at the bottom a set of nozzles you could swap out. This is a sausage stuffer, and before the meat industry centralized, every farm family made their own sausages. You'd grind your pork, mix it with salt and sage and pepper, then load the mixture into that funnel. Turn the crank and the screw presses the meat down through the nozzle into casings made from cleaned intestines. It's slow, deliberate work. You'd make 50 pounds of sausage in an afternoon, hang them in the smokehouse, and feed your family through the winter. The sausage stuffer was part of the rhythm of fall, like canning tomatoes or putting up preserves. But when refrigerated trucks made fresh meat available year-round, and grocery stores started selling packaged sausages, the home stuffer disappeared. It wasn't worth the labor anymore. Now they're collectibles, and most people assume they are some kind of pasta maker or grain mill. The truth, the smell of sage and smoke and the satisfaction of a full smokehouse is forgotten. Step outside that kitchen and into the barn and you'd find tools that are even more mysterious. Hanging on the wall is a long wooden blade, 3 feet from tip to handle, with a slight curve and a dull edge. It looks almost like a machete but heavier, made from a single piece of forged steel with a wooden grip riveted on. This is a hay knife, and it was used to cut blocks of hay from a compressed stack. Before balers made those neat rectangular bales you see in fields today, hay was stored loose in enormous stacks, packed down tight by the weight. When you needed to feed your animals, you didn't pull it apart with a pitchfork. You cut it like slicing bread. You drive that hay knife straight down, saw back and forth, and carve out a clean block. The blade was dull on purpose. You weren't cutting individual stalks. You were shearing through compressed mass. The hay knife disappeared when the mechanical baler arrived in the 1940s. Suddenly, hay came in uniform bales, easy to move and stack. The knife, that ingenious tool, became worthless overnight. Now people find them in old barns and think they're corn knives or brush-clearing blades. They're not. They're bread knives for hay, and they worked perfectly. Did your grandfather have one of these in his shed? Tell me below. In that same barn you'd find another mystery tool, one that looks almost medieval. It's a heavy blade, maybe 12 inches wide, mounted on a short wooden handle. The blade is forged thick with a single beveled edge, and it weighs enough that gravity does most of the work. This is a broadaxe, and it was the tool that turned round logs into flat beams. Before sawmills became common, if you wanted to build a barn or a house frame, you'd fell a tree, strip the bark, and then hew it square with a broadaxe. You'd stand on top of the log and swing that axe down at an angle, taking off chips as wide as your hand, flattening one side, then roll the log and do it again. A skilled man could hew a beam so flat you'd think it was sawn. The broadaxe blade was offset from the handle so your knuckles wouldn't hit the wood. It's a specialized, perfectly evolved tool, but circular sawmills made beams faster and cheaper, and by the early 1900s the broadaxe was already rare. Today people confuse them with splitting mauls or felling axes. But a broadaxe wasn't for splitting or felling. It was for shaping, for precision, for turning wilderness into shelter. Inside the farmhouse in the parlor, a different kind of tool lived in the sewing basket. It's a slender hook, maybe 6 inches long, made from ivory or bone or silver depending on how wealthy the family was. One end is a handle, decorative and smooth. The other end is a thin hook, no thicker than a needle. This is a buttonhook, and before zippers were invented, it was how you got dressed. Shoes had rows of tiny buttons up the side, sometimes 20 or more. Ladies' gloves buttoned at the wrist. Boots, corsets, high collars, all fastened with buttons so small your fingers couldn't manage them. You'd slip the buttonhook through the buttonhole, catch the button with the hook and pull it through. Every well-dressed person carried one. They were often beautiful, engraved or monogrammed, given as gifts. Then zippers arrived in the 1920s and Velcro in the 50s, and suddenly buttons were old-fashioned. The buttonhook, once as essential as a wallet, became useless. Now they show up in estate sales and people think they're crochet hooks or medical instruments. The elegant little tool that fastened a generation is forgotten. Down in the workshop, you'd find a tool that looks almost like a sculpture. It's a cast iron leg and foot, mounted on a wooden post with 3 flat surfaces at different angles. This is a cobbler's last, and it's how every shoe was made and repaired for centuries. Before factory-made shoes, a cobbler would build a shoe around a wooden or iron last shaped like a foot. The last had different surfaces for the heel, the sole, the instep, each one perfectly angled so you could hammer and stitch and shape the leather. Even after factory shoes became common, every town had a cobbler who'd resole your boots, and he used a last to hold the shoe steady while he worked. But when shoes became cheap enough to throw away instead of repair, the cobbler's trade died. The last, that beautiful functional form, ended up in antique shops. People use them as doorstops or bookends. They don't know they're holding the tool that kept America walking. Out in the field, there's a tool that looks like an axe head married to a wedge. It's an L-shaped blade, maybe 18 inches long, with a wooden handle fitted perpendicular to the blade. This is a froe, and it was the tool that made roof shingles. You take a straight-grained block of cedar or oak, set the froe blade across the end grain, and strike the back of the blade with a wooden mallet. The blade would split a thin shingle along the grain, clean and straight. A skilled man could make hundreds of shingles in a day, all from a single log. Shake roofs, clapboard siding, barrel staves, all were made with a froe. Then sawmills started cutting shingles mechanically, faster and cheaper, and the froe disappeared. Today people find them and think they're hatchets or strange chisels. The splitting motion, the rhythm of mallet and blade, is lost. Next to the froe you'd often find its partner, a tool that looks like a blade with handles on both ends. It's a long curved piece of steel, maybe 2 feet across, sharpened on one edge, with a wooden handle at each end perpendicular to the blade. This is a drawknife, and it was how you shaped wood. You'd clamp a piece of wood in a shaving horse, grip both handles of the drawknife and pull it toward you, peeling off long curls of wood. Chair legs, tool handles, wagon parts, anything round or tapered was shaped with a drawknife. It gave you control that no other tool could match. You could feel the grain through the blade, adjust your angle instantly. But power lathes and routers made shaping faster, and the drawknife faded. Now they're wall decorations, their purpose misunderstood, their elegance lost. In the kitchen again, two more mysteries. One is a cast iron hand crank device with a hopper on top and a drawer below. This is a corn sheller and it saved countless hours. You'd feed dried ears of corn into the hopper, turn the crank and the kernels would strip off and fall into the drawer while the cobs came out the back. Before corn shellers, you did it by hand, rubbing ears against each other or using a stick, slow and hard on your hands. The corn sheller was a small revolution. But when farming mechanized and corn went straight from field to elevator, the hand crank sheller became obsolete. The other is a small hinged device, cast iron, with a plunger and a hole in the base. This is a cherry pitter and it did exactly one thing perfectly. You'd place a cherry in the cradle, press the plunger, and a rod would punch the pit out through the bottom. One cherry at a time, but faster than using a knife, and you kept your fingers. When your trees produced bushels of cherries every June, you needed one. But when store-bought canned cherries and cherry pie filling became cheap and available, the labor wasn't worth it anymore. The cherry pitter joined the others, forgotten. These tools built this country and we let them fade. Hit subscribe so they are not forgotten, and tell me below if your family owned one.